Hi, I'm Britton LaRue, and this is Moon to Moon. Moon to Moon is a space to consider, celebrate, and share the ways we come home to ourselves, anchor through change, and uncover our power. 1 month, one phase, one loving step at a time. Dear Moon to Moon, I am vibrating still a few hours later from my conversation on the 11th house, Unshaming the 11th house with Kelsey Rose Tortorice. Wow, it's the first of these that I've done since Pluto entered Aquarius. It's the first of these Unshaming the houses that I've done on the other side of the election. And I have been feeling myself very much in a new timeline, a new way of being, a new, but also quite liminal space of change. And this conversation to me really feels like the expression of the future pathway that is already here now, that I feel myself to be on, and in which I am interested in being on with others who are vibrating with the same frequency and holding the same dream, or at least a dream that quivers and vibrates in resonance with mine. So this is a really, really powerful conversation. You'll feel us both being very moved and delighted by the freshness of it. So I'd like to just dive on in. We define the 11th house throughout, but just to kind of drop you there for those of you new to astrology, because we don't do an official definition right away, so I'll do it here. That we call the 11th house the house of good spirit in Hellenistic astrology. It's considered a really supportive house because as the sun is ascending in the sky, it ascends towards the peak of the sky. And while we associate the peak of the sky with the 10th house, I hope that you've had a chance to listen to the Unshaming the 10th house conversation with Diana Rose Harper, which is also incredible. The 11th house is what the sun travels through on the way. So it has a lot of powerful ascending energy that has to do with being connected to the spirit of your hopes and dreams and visions for this world and for your role in participating in it with others. And in more modern astrology, we associate it with our groups, our social networks, organizations that we belong to, basically how we gather with other people around these shared interests, these shared dreams, these shared goals. And so that's a little introduction for you to bring you in. Kelsey's bio. Kelsey is a post-capitalist astrologer, teacher, human design experiMentor, capital M, and community initiator. They are a student and teacher of the Maia, seeking to understand and universalize the mechanics of reality within the context of individuality, cosmos, and consciousness as a whole. Their work facilitates upheaval, disrupting homogenized programming, and reorienting people to their differentiated truth and inherent wholeness. And I share a bunch of links in the show notes for connecting more with Kelsey. Kelsey, also, I'll remind listeners, was on Moon to Moon for an episode called The Fifth Line Experience, where we were looking at the 5 line in profiles for human design. And that was a very popular episode, and I will link it in the show notes as well, because I know for many it was really, really fun for you. Kelsey is a 5-2 and I'm a 3-5. All right, then. I'm going to pass the mic over to the two of us on the other side. Cheers and enjoy. Welcome back to Moon, Kelsey Rose Tortorice.
Thank you, and thanks for having me again.
We had such a yummy conversation on the Fifth Line Experience. I guess that was in the spring, April.
Yeah. Literally another lifetime ago for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
You crossed a big threshold. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I had a baby. So it was April when we talked. I had a baby in the last days of July. And now, yeah, time has been doing weird things for me for years. I feel like I've been in a time void for a while. So I don't know if that part of new parenthood, I don't know if I can contribute that to new parenthood, but it's wild to me that it's already fall. I'm kind of just like a little bit frozen in time at Selima's arrival. So it's kind of weird that time has actually progressed since then. But here we are, half a year later.
Here we are. And I just spoke of you in the most recent episode because I had Allison Marie Dale on, who was in Heretic Haven.
Oh, cool.
With you and Allison. And we were talking about Sag season through the gates of Sagittarius, because Allison has that podcast, Cycles of Time. And so we talked about how we met in Heretic Haven.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask. I was going to ask if you met there. I love that.
I guess she was following me before that through Jonathan Coe, but that's when I noticed her, I guess, through the Instagram group space. And that's when I started following her. And then I really enjoy her content. So I invited her on.
That's so cool. That's like one of my connections to the 11th house, actually, is like getting to see how the little 11th house and drop out for a sec.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
You're back though.
Cool. I've been blessed to get to see how a lot of my own little creative pursuits just happen to, as a side effect, create communities that I'm not necessarily a part of, but like just seeing people find threads of connection through my own creative expression. So like I recently found out that I have what I refer to as a podcast grandchild, because through Ascendant Assemblies, which was like a community thing I initiated a few years back. I don't know if you were aware of that.
No, I don't remember.
I miss it. I want to start it again. But anyways, through Ascendant Assemblies, these two people met and created a podcast together. And Ascendant Assemblies was an initiation of mine. So I'm like, that's my podcast grandbaby. So anyways, it's just fun to hear that like collaboration happened between you and Allison, at least partially as a result of a community that I helped to foster.
A Haven is a community. finding other fifth lines is really, really helpful. I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if it's the same. I mean, this is off topic slash not off topic.
It's
Do
all
you feel
connected.
it's all connected? Do you feel that other profile lines could have their own havens and it would have a
Of
sense
course,
of connectedness? Hmm.
yeah, of course they could have a space where they meet. And that's kind of what the 11th house to me is. It's like a
Hmm.
space where our shared expression, shared vision intersects. Um, I don't know that they have a need for a haven the way that fifth lines do, because there's something to being a fifth line that like I don't know about if I'd say requires, but like it behooves us as heretics to have a space where we feel protected from the potential violence in the projection field, you know? So I don't know that I would
Hmm.
call it a haven, and I don't think it would feel the same. Like you felt there was this like powerful, seductive, mysterious quality, like force field around us when we met all as fifth lines, right? Like it was just like this truth that permeated the energy in the Zoom space. So not to no profile line superiority complex or anything, but it wouldn't be the same, right? And I will never know what it would be like to meet in a group of first lines, third lines, fourth lines, or sixth lines. But I do know what it feels like to meet with fifth lines, and it was a powerful to acknowledge our shared experience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for creating that space. It was really a an opportunity through community to take some of the realities of my experience more seriously as just here, just part of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you can't acknowledge what is here, you can't really support yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So, thank you. We've been dabbling at talking about the 11th house.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share with listeners that when I first dreamed of this project of having different guest astrologers come on for each house for unshaming the realm of life, the department of life that each house signifies in the language of astrology, I very intuitively listed names and just have been very honored that everyone has said yes that I've reached out to. And I put your name down for the 11th house. Knowing your chart, I was like, I don't think that I'm not sure that there's anything in the 11th house. And I've double checked it and no, but something about you and your heretical voice felt important for this particular episode. So thank you for saying yes.
I mean, I was excited in general to be included in this project, but I was like so I don't know if I don't think I was quite perplexed. That's a little bit more. I was curious why. Um,
Mhm.
and I even though I know you said there wasn't any like rationalization, it was intuitive. I'm still like curious, why your intuition picked me for that house. But also just excited because I do have a lot to say about the 11th house for someone who doesn't have
Yes.
anything in it. I
Well,
do have a lot to
I
say
mean,
about it.
I think maybe it's because I remember you having done promo for maybe a workshop or a class that
Yeah.
had to do with third house versus seventh house versus
Yep.
11th house.
Yep.
And I was like listening, like Kelsey's saying important things here. So
Hmm.
I think that's part of it. That
Yeah.
seeded it.
Well, and I think like we both you and I think probably as fifth lines both have had challenging experiences with the 11th house.
Mhm.
So also your connection to me and your perception of me being like so connected to your concept of heresy and the fifth line experience. I wonder too if there's just like an intuitive connection to the experience we have as heretics in 11th house situations. I also noticed, obviously I know this about myself, but I noticed that we both have ruler of the 11th um, debilitated in the fifth, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Huh? Yes, I am Aquarius, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
in the 11th, and I have Saturn and Leo in the 5th. And so
Mm-hmm.
then you have
Libra on the 11th and
mm,
Venus in Aries in the fifth. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
and like Venus pretty tightly conjunct my sun as well. So like when I always really identified as someone who was super communally oriented my whole life. Um, I guess I can say why I identified that way. So my background before I was in the healing arts scene was in music education. I went to school for music education and I taught high school choir and then eventually also like piano and music theory for a total of like 8 or 9 years. I can't remember which. Uh, and then, and my entry point into music and choir was I was in this youth choir in Cleveland, Ohio, growing up called the Singing Angels, which has been around since 1964. And like, if you're from Cleveland, you know somebody who has been in that group. Um, and that was like my whole life growing up. I joined when I was 8. I stayed till I graduated college or graduated high school, which is when you finish. So my entire childhood, pretty much, I was in this group and so much of my identity was wrapped into it. And still some of my oldest friends that I stay in touch with were in that with me versus like high school friends I'm not as close to in most cases. Um, and that was just this huge community that I was a part of. And you can see the connection too between my sense of community in the 11th house being ruled by a fifth house planet, right? It was a community about singing and music making and dancing. It's like a huge show choir, basically. And we traveled, sang with like the Bare Naked Ladies, Nancy Sinatra
How
for the Pope, et
fun.
cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So it feels so distant now, but for so much of my life, it was my whole life. And it was a community, and that my sense of belonging and kinship inside of that community was like everything to me for so long. And when I lost it or graduated from it, I was always seeking out new experiences and new settings to come back to that feeling of shared experience, that feeling of like shared expression. And I went into music education. And when I was leaving music education, I remember asking myself a lot, like, why? What about music ed did I love? Because there's a lot that's not working for me anymore. There's a lot that doesn't feel compatible with my bandwidth and my interests and my window of tolerance. And so I was asking myself a lot, what about it do I want to maintain? Just to kind of get a sense of where do I want to go from here? And the one thing it always came back to was community. I loved as a music teacher fostering community in my classroom around singing, around making music. And so there's been this thread, human design language. I have a defined G. So there's been this like thread in my trajectory that has always come back to the expression in a shared setting, which is essentially how I think of the 11th house, vision and expression in a shared setting,
I
or
love that.
shared vision and expression. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I found astrology and was looking at my empty 11th, I was like, what's that about? And eventually you learn that there's lots of layers to it. So like having an 11th ruler conjoin my sun is significant, right? I also have Lilith in Libra,
Yes,
so Lilith in my 11th house,
I
which is,
saw that.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
explained some things retrospectively about like heretic stuff and sometimes being villainized in certain communal contexts. Um, but then also human design speak, I have a planet in 10, gate 10, line 4. And a planet in gate 10 is a lot about how the self expresses oneself and the self shows up. And 4 is, we know about fourth line profiles. They're very communally network oriented. So even though I am a 5-2, you could say because of my 10-4 placement, which does connect to two channels. I have the 1020 and the 1057. So it's a loud placement.
Mm-hmm.
It's a like defined, consistent placement in my design that I behave like the networker. So even though my actual profile is 5-2, I'm showing up on the scene a lot like a fourth line. So I'm like initiating Heretic Haven, where people meet each other, where community lines are drawn. I'm initiating Ascendant Assemblies, where the same thing happens. When I lived in Chicago, I was like hosting a bunch of, we called it perfect nights. We had like really cool themed open mic nights where people from my music ed world and my healing arts world and my college party scene world would all kind of come together, and we would witness each other creating things. And I got to see all sorts of cool connections be created through that. Actually, that's how I met Diana, I know you did the 10th house one with,
Yes.
was through Diana and I had a mutual friend, and we met at one of these like creative, artistic, communal events that I had initiated. So different like nuances of my design and my astrology has helped me see my relationship to community. It's maybe not something that's like as forefront in my essence and what I'm here to do as I thought it was. But it kind of is just in like a weird counterculture way, which I wonder if you relate to that being somebody who has Lord of the 11th um, opposite
Mhm.
it in the fifth, debilitated.
Yeah. There's an interesting parallel here that I, after college, taught humanities to seventh and eighth graders. I chose that age because I remember that being just such a cool age for transformation and like how liminal it is and how weird it is and also how exciting it is to start becoming yourself.
Yeah.
But what happened is my passion was hosting a film club and like different outlets for kids who kind of needed a group, and hanging with them and enjoying their humor and giving them an opportunity to expand their world some beyond just like the reality of that particular school. Um, and then I feel like I create spaces for people to kind of find each other who maybe didn't really know how to fit into other places. This like Aquarian place.
Hmm.
Growing up, I had a real resistance to groups, like because I didn't want to be labeled. And so I would have like a friend over here who's like into fish and who goes to fish shows and like wears hem necklaces. And then my other best friend is like from Venezuela, like Latina, like from a very different culture. They're not friends. They don't hang out with each other. But I really love the idea of people not matching. Like, do we really have to match? Like, can't we just each be our own self and not agree to agree on everything?
Hmm.
Which to me, I didn't have the language of Aquarius to help me understand
Yeah.
that. But I also had terror around really expressing my Aquarian nature when I was younger. So my creativity didn't come in fifth house opposite
Mhm.
really until I became more comfortable at expressing my Aquarian nature, I would say.
Mm.
And really through being a parent, like thinking about the fifth house as parenting. My hopes and dreams for this world were similar to the hopes and dreams I have for my daughters.
Mm.
And in parenting them to be their own selves and to be sovereign that way,
Mm. Hmm.
I feel like it's helped me create a template inside myself for the kind of communities that I want to belong
Yeah,
to.
I love that. And you can really hear like the having kind of a well, having the ruler of the 11th in a fire sign, right? Um,
Hmm.
I think I come at community in a similar, having air, fire across that axis the same way you do, but different, having it be Libra, Aries instead of Aquarius, Leo way. Like, I feel like a lot of the way that I talk about community is through this lens of seeing how community and shared experience, shared vision can sometimes, or not even can sometimes, but is naturally at odds via the opposition with your sense of self expression, fifth house, but also in my case, the like core essence and authenticity of who you are, Aries, which very similar to Leo. I can kind of hear the agreement, disagreement come out in the Leo piece for you because it's like Leo being the center of each of our own solar system. We literally cannot see everything the same. We
Hmm.
just can't. Like there just is difference. And so in my own journey with community stuff and fifth line stuff, I have felt like I've been asked sometimes or pressured sometimes to compromise my own authenticity or my own uniqueness, my own differentiation for the sake of community. And used to be more willing to do that than I am now, or used to be too afraid to not do that. And that stuff's still there, but seeing the geometry of my chart has helped me like it's helped to validate this sense I have that like, yes, maybe there's a natural polarity here. There's a natural opposition, push and pull between the fifth house, my own unique expression, the things that are wanting to be birthed through me and me alone. The fifth house being like, you know, it's still under the horizon. It's this very like subjective, fertile, not public place. Like the things that we want to create through our fifth house. I almost even feel like the word want is misleading because it's this like primitive, primal, erotic, organic gestation that's happening that we don't necessarily have a choice about, you know, like we're vessels for what comes through us in a fifth house way. And listening to that is not always going to be in complete congruence with who our allies are, you know, that like public relational place, which is kind of how I think of the 11th house. It's like the public, objective, relational setting in some cases for what we're creating in a fifth house way. But seeing that laid out in the chart as polarity, as opposite, has helped me to just personally feel a sense of acceptance that my visions on a personal level, what's wanting to be created and moved through me, is not ever going to perfectly match the public relational containers that can hold it. But I don't actually have to totally compromise, even though my Libra, you know, setting on the 11th I want to compromise, and it is in my nature to find compromise, but also as an Aries stellium, Aries Sun, Venus, Mercury in the fifth, there's there's a limit to how much I can compromise, right? Because what I'm focused on, what I'm bringing through, it has to come through in the unique and differentiated way that feels authentic to me in any given moment. So I guess, yeah, I think what I'm getting at in this moment is just like seeing that it's natural and inevitable for what we're creating on this personal sacred plane to not always be fully accepted, to not always be fully celebrated by, understood by, held by the relational social container for that.
Yes. And I think that that's really where shame comes in, because if we doubt ourselves or invalidate what's wanting to come through us because we don't think it matches a picture of goodness, which is often what we're doing when we're contorting to preserving our goodness according to the codes of the
Mm-hmm.
affiliation groups that we care for, then we'll silence ourselves.
Yeah. Well,
And
and
I
like,
think,
oh, sorry. I'm so
no, no,
sorry.
no, no. I know we can.
I'm just excited, but
Don't
keep
go,
going.
go, go,
No, no,
please.
no. I wrote it down. You keep going.
Okay. I was just gonna say, I think um my as my hopes and dreams really began to clarify into like not just like a generalized picture of a more just world, but one that also included the paradoxical and the contradictory, um, and made a lot of spaciousness for compassion for how truth can be messy and contradictory and paradoxical. I think that that kind of just pulled me into the unshaming as like a torch I'm holding up for community, because it's just become more clear. I think the older we get, the more specific we can become in the 11th house, because we begin to slough off whatever's not actually true for us,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the light we want to hold for the world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Please, I want to hear what you're going
Yeah.
to say.
Well, now I have something new to say, but
Okay, amazing.
but yeah, just like I think what I'm hearing in that last bit you shared is like as we age, as we move through our life, as we have more and more opportunities to attune to self and reattune to self through all these different conditions that we move through, we have a greater capacity for discernment and we have a keener ability to discern. And so navigating the felt opposition, the felt polarity of what I'm creating for myself, or not even for myself, but just because it's this thing that's happening through my body, fifth house, versus how that's being held, nurtured, accepted, perceived, collaborated with, or not on the public plane, in the communal plane. um we don't might not get as lost in the binary. We might not get as lost in the back and forth. We might not have to swing as far back and forth because we're closer to ourself, or we I don't think this is the case for everyone, but it's possible for us to be closer to ourself the more life we live. And then not to necessarily take so dramatically how that expression of self is or isn't like held and esteemed in that 11th house context. Like, and maybe this is like us having air on the 11th house too. There's like the
Mhm.
potential to have some sense of like neutrality or detachment from what's actually happening there and see it as utilitarian in a way, maybe like how can I work within the context of my 11th house situations as a resource, which that's another way that I started to really feel into what the 11th house meant to me years back when I was like piecing together all the geometry of astrology, is that the 11th is succeedent to the 10th. And the way I think about the succeedent houses is that they belong to, but also they offer resource to. So if, like the second house is, if the first house is the self, the second house is what the self has. The seventh house is relationship. The eighth house is what the relationship has. The 10th house is
Mhm.
my legacy, my ambition, where I'm going in some instances. The 11th house is what belongs to that, and also like the
Mhm.
resource and environment to that and for that. So that's helped me too, to just see the 11th house as like a resource and a tool. And here's like where the shame piece I think can come in as well, as like the 11th house, belonging shows up a lot in the 11th house, right? Because we want to belong to something. But I think, and I think this is part of what inspired the workshop I taught that you referenced. It was now almost 3 years ago. It was
Mhm.
called, it's a wordful, get ready. Everything I teach is a wordful, a mouthful. It was called Approaching Community and Relationship through, hold on, I have it here, through an exploration of the astrological houses.
Yes.
Approaching community and relationality through an exploration of the astrological houses. And I was seeing like this was a different time. So I actually think as a collective, as a community, whatever I mean by that, the people I like view and talk to online about spirituality and astrology, et cetera, et cetera, I feel we've grown a lot in the direction that I was kind of proposing in this workshop that I taught in January of 2022. So I love that. But the heresy that I was bringing at the time was around like seeing a lot of kind of obscure use of the concept and word community, and people putting a lot of expectations on their communities and on communities, and putting a lot of stock in what they felt they were like entitled to receiving from community. And I was like, hold on, like,
Mhm.
you know, let's think about this because and I think the way I'm talking about community, even already, the way I was like, it's utilitarian, it's a tool, it's a resource, it might sound kind of cold.
Mhm.
And maybe some people will feel that from me, and that's fine, I guess. But like a big part of my sort of thesis in that workshop was the 11th house is not the seventh house, and the 11th house is not the eighth house. It's not this place where there's like natural accountability, or at least where accountability is ingrained, right? Like accountability is ingrained into the seventh house. That's one of the ways that I learned about the seventh house was its relationships to which we have accountability within. And then the eighth
Mhm.
house is this place of like deep, raw intimacy and vulnerability and intention and enmeshment, entanglement, right? Um, that level of vulnerability doesn't exist on the 11th house. What creates an 11th house setting is we have a shared interest. We have a shared vision. We have a
Yes.
shared goal. And like that's beautiful. And I don't mean to minimize the importance of that place. And again, the ruler of that place is conjunct my sun. So like it can't be separated from my own essence, my experiences of the 11th house. Um, but the 11th house as it is not about vulnerability. It's not about accountability. It's about allyship. And like allyship,
Mhm.
while having a purpose, and while being an extremely important part of existence on the planet, allyship is not inherently contractual, you know? You can be an ally to one cause one day and you could flip on it. I'm thinking about like foreign policy allies, like they change, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like maybe not that deep either, but like potential contradictory statement. But like when I think about, I had to go through this experience with astrology where for me, finding astrology and becoming astrologically literate was really correlated to my experience of like ego death and spiritual realization, um, and like surrender and acceptance and growing more and more towards love and the acceptance of everyone and all things. And so, of course, I projected that onto everyone. I thought, oh, you are astrologically literate. You're a loving being who offers grace to differentiation and who, reveres process and can see things with nuance, because these are things that astrology, made more accessible in my own psyche and my own process. But that's not everybody has that experience. And so for me, like I had to become jaded to an extent because I had to realize that the astrology community, my connection with them was not actually that deep. My connection
Mhm.
with the astrology community is that we're interested in astrology. That's it. Right. And you could say that for any community that you're a part of. You're allied in some way, but not always.
Mhm.
Right. And so that's where I start to see like the strong distinction between the seventh and the 11th is one example, and how what that workshop was about, like kind of um, growing discernment by seeing that relationship doesn't just live in one place in our chart, and where are we conflating relationships and expectations of different relationships? What are we expecting from our communities? And I just kind of came to a point where I was like, all I can expect from community and all I owe any communities I'm a part of is allyship and an investment in the thing that we align on, which is not everything. It's one thing, maybe some things.
Yes. Rah. This is really important for like the future we're in. Um, Making more space for this because we don't have the capacity to hold the possibility that like we both agree that this thing here is so important, but we also don't agree on this thing. What do we
Yeah.
do? Like, to me, one of the ways shame will function is the fear that we are bad by having any kind of affiliation with someone who may possibly not agree with us on
Mm-hmm.
something will cut us off from connectivity that is, I think, honestly, like what I'm feeling right now is like harmful to the whole of the planet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if Aquarius knows anything, it's that being at odds with something doesn't have to mean wishing violence upon it, right?
Hmm.
Or doesn't have to be detrimental to the well-being of it.
Yeah. Like in the moment that we're in, here in November of 2024, I'm really obsessed with the phenomenon and um, disclosure. I'm just gonna be open about this. Like, I love these discussions and I love exploring with big thinkers and philosophers about what are we not seeing here. But there are a lot of individuals in that community that like my hairs turn up on my head, on my neck, just like, I don't think I'm going to agree with you about a lot of things. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like, so do I just not listen to a single thing that can come out of this person's mouth? Like holding that, I think, is where shame can come in when we're terrified that we can't trust ourselves. Because one of the number one consequences of shame is lack of self-trust. I think if you trust yourself, you know that you can navigate against where your boundaries are with the
Mm-hmm.
people that you're in various affiliation groups with, while staying
Mm-hmm.
true to yourself and what your principles are
Mm-hmm.
and what your hopes and dreams for this planet
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like parts work is kind of coming to mind. Can you discern
Yes.
what part of you is aligned with this group or this person, this community, this agenda? again, coming back to the idea of like vision being a part of the fifth, ninth access. And
Mm-hmm.
also vision to the connectivity between the 10th and the 11th in process, and like the 11th as the resource or succeedant to the 10th. Where am I going? What's my legacy? What impact is being made through my life in the direction of my life in the 10th? And then, but what's the social context that holds that? Like, we do need allyship. None of us can do any of this on our own. So that feeling that we have of like, I need to belong to something, I need to be accepted, the fear we have of being abandoned by those with uh, contexts that overlap ours, maybe another way of talking about the 11th house, like that's
Mm-hmm.
real and valid and is only a part of the equation. Because the moment that we over prioritize the allyship over the fire in our own heart, over the truth of our own expression and our own experience, the moment that that flame is put out, that flame is smothered. uh in another piece on shame, the thing I wrote down earlier that I did not end
Yes.
up circling back to, so I was thinking about I can't remember what it was you said, so apologies that the through line is lacking, but I was thinking about the sextile from the ninth to the 11th, and also kind of the sextile from the first to the 11th, and how like we want to belong to our group, and oftentimes the shared interests or shared visions, shared agendas and contexts of the 11th house are very connected to our value systems and our beliefs, which show up in the ninth, right? And so therefore we might put a lot of stock in being accepted, being celebrated by the people in our 11th house context, because it feels like a reflection of what we believe in, right? It feels like a
Mm-hmm.
reflection of our worldview. And then the self is part of that too, right? So our sense of self can get so easily caught up in our sense of what we believe. They trine each other, right? And then how that's celebrated, accepted, or not within the context of our 11th house. So just bringing more, cosmic geometry context to
Mm-hmm.
why we might um, struggle with the polarity between our fifth house innate organic expression and the context in which it's received on a communal level by our allies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. I'm curious if you have any thoughts for those who are not fire or air rising, who would be looking at earth or water
Mm.
in the 11th. If you've mentioned how
Yeah.
we're both air.
Yeah, well, can we play with it
Yeah,
together?
let's
So
play. Let's
let's
play.
start with us, because that's
Hmm.
where I always start, as like what's the pattern we're looking at as, so you and I are both fire risings,
I'm
which means,
Aries.
yeah. And so our fire first house trines our fire fifth house and our fire ninth house. And
Hmm.
I think of, and this isn't a Kelsey thing, this is a thing. The first, fifth, and ninth, I have to make the distinction sometimes. Um, I think that's a second line thing. I'm like, this did not come from research. This came from a corner of my brain. This is coming from actual learning in academia. Um, this thing. So the first, fifth, and ninth are the fire houses. Like they're associated
Mhm.
with fiery kind of elements, like sense of self, right? Our sense of self is connected to our expression. The fifth is connected to our worldview, the ninth, right?
Mhm.
Second, sixth, 10th are thought of as like the earth houses, or sometimes I call them the work houses, right? Money, obligations in our work, health, illness, 10th house, career, fulfillment type stuff. And then third, seventh, 11th are thought of as the air houses, or the social houses, relationship, as we've been talking about. And then 4, 8, 12 are thought of as the water houses, have kind of a spiritual context. I like to refer to them sometimes as the liminal houses of our chart. Um, and so you have in common an elemental orientation with everyone who you share a rising sign with. So I keep mentioning this like fire on the fifth, air on the 11th vibe that's kind of showing up for you and I, because we're both fire rising. So that's going to be true for Leo risings, Sag risings like myself, and Aries risings like you. And it'll be the reverse for people with air rising. So we could maybe
Mhm.
do we want to touch
Sure.
on do we want to riff
Sure.
on
We're
that?
just riffing. Yeah.
Yeah. What would it be like as an air rising? You've got um air, this like social element on the fire houses. So on the houses that are about self and self transformation and self expression and self understanding. But those people, Libra, Aquarius, and Gemini risings, have fire on the social houses. Which
Mhm.
the first thought that comes to mind is like, yeah, if you're air, you're an inherently social being. And so to have the experience of self-transformation and understanding, fire, in the social houses makes sense. They find themselves through relationship.
Mhm.
Is this
Yes.
tracking? Okay.
Yes. And that may also translate, it feels like, to a kind of fiery, mutating capacity socially.
Totally. Which those three signs all have.
Yeah. Yeah. Fire in the social houses. Hmm.
Hmm. So our air risings have fire, yeah, in the 11th house of allyship and community. Yeah, that tracks. Okay, so should we go to water or earth rising next? Which one?
Um,
Water.
yeah, water.
So water people have water on 159, these houses that are correlated in some way to the understanding and experience and expression of self. Which, I mean, that just track, right? They trine. So whatever you have on your first, you're going to have that same kind of elemental orientation to your expression in your fifth, and your worldview, belief system, your philosophy on life in your ninth. So that tracks. But then you're going to have earth on your social houses, including this 11th house that we're focusing on. So the first thing that comes to mind to me with that is like water is about connectivity, right?
Mhm.
Like water is the element through which we experience the um, inevitability of ultimate connection, even through
Mhm.
our separateness. And so, earth is this like tangible part of our life. So, these water people who experience themselves through water have to experience relationship, which is the physical manifest of connectivity. Um, they have to experience these like three social houses in a very like tangible way that they put a lot of pragmatic, practical emphasis into in their life.
Mhm.
That's what intuitively popped up with my first
Yeah,
curiosity
I
around that.
I love it. Yeah, it just feels like the the spirit here moving through those houses, 159, the spirit of the feeling self wanting to concretize through relationship
Mm,
what the
mm,
feelings that
mm.
you I love your face.
I'm just so glad that you were able to take my like Italian hand, Pisces North Node hands in the air, trying to find words and put it into a sentence that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that.
We got this. Oh, okay. Earth risings, yes.
Yeah.
Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn.
So our Earth risings experience self-expression, self-understanding in the context of the larger world in a very practical, physical way.
Mhm.
And their orientation to the social realm, third, seventh, 11th, is water.
Yeah. Maybe through relationship and relationality and connectivity, there's like this kind of an opportunity to release the felt, um, the feelings that are otherwise, they're like, I almost see the water like coming out of the vessel that is the self or the spirit of the first, fifth, and
Yeah. Yeah, I'm having a harder time with this one,
it is, yeah.
but I'm thinking I didn't do this for any of our other examples. I was just thinking more archetypally, but for this one, for some reason, I'm starting to just bring in the Virgo, Cap, and Taurus rising people that I know and like looking for the thread that comes to mind when I
Mhm.
think about how do they orient to relationship and the social realm. and they all take it really seriously,
Yes.
which is earthy. Um, but I do also feel like they're all people whose spiritual transformation and spiritual growth and spiritual awareness is very organized around their experience of relationship.
Hmm. Yeah, we're just riffing here. But it feels like the presence of Earth risings has this kind of solidity to it, but through the sharing and the relating, there's more of an aqueduct, there's like more tears, more
Yeah.
feelings that can transform the space through the water.
Yeah. Yes. Like there's a vulnerability required in those
Hmm.
social houses that can lend towards the spiritual transformation that water offers, that earth people in particular might have a challenging time with that because they're here for the solid, they're here for the practical, and there's a tendency for earth to want to be sturdy on their own. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's kind of what's coming through to me is this like shared experience of vulnerability when it comes to relationship, but that being something that really ends up moving them and changing them, which they
Mm.
might not, they might experience some resistance to as
Oh my
earth.
gosh. I just love this so much.
Yeah, chart geometry is the best. This is why, and this is what ascendant assemblies was when it
Okay,
existed.
bring it back.
I want to bring it back, but I can't do it alone. And here's
Okay.
my 11th house shit. I
You
can't do it
gotta
alone.
have a
And
partner at the
yeah,
Libra.
like I need collaborators and I have a fraught relationship with collaboration. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, and that's an outdated thing about me. I wouldn't say my relationship with collaboration is fraught anymore, but it's still, I just like maybe this is the Libra showing up. Like there's a lot of indecision for me with collaboration because I really want things to feel equitable and I don't always know how to do that. And here's the second house squaring the 11th and the 5th. I am not a very financially resourced person. I have Saturn conjunct Neptune with Uranus in the second house. Like it's a
Hmm.
journey for me to experience financial resourceness and like I've learned a lot about it. I feel very liberated compared to past self, but I can't traditionally, conventionally resource people all the time in a way that feels equitable to me, Libra on the 11th, and still honors the the fire, the creative fire for the vision that I have moving through me. So like the difficult thing with Ascendant assemblies was, well, let me say what it was.
Yeah.
And it should exist again. So if anyone listening wants to make this happen, find
I
me.
love
Find me
it.
and I'll at least bring my manifestor initiation powers to it. I can't promise to sustain it because I can't sustain shit, but I can help get it started again. Um it was like by month every other month. So six ascendant signs would meet every month and then it would flip. So it was just like Zoom hangouts with astrologers of your rising sign to talk about how the fuck are the transits hitting, and what's going on. And of course, it would often evolve into conversation much deeper than just the transit because we would be doing what you and I just did, the chart
Mhm.
geometry. We would be doing that, but on a much more specific level. So, like, as Sag risings, man, those were some of the best Zoom calls I've ever been on. Those Sag Rising Zoom
Oh,
calls. Yeah, they were fucking fun. And like people out in the world, Mackenzie, Shahir, Cam Allen, like these are all people that like Carol Ann Steinhoff. I don't know if you know all these people, but these are people that
I remember it now that you've
yeah,
described it. And I
yeah.
remember thinking this would be really good for me.
The Aries one was the least attended one
That's
across the board.
hilarious.
Yeah.
That may not be so much because of Aries, but because of Sag in the ninth and Aquarius in the 11th.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah.
often as a student, like the Sag part is that I often just bail from things that like I get the first class and then I'm like, I've learned everything I need for my backpack and I'm out of here.
Totally.
um,
Totally. Well, and as a third
that
line, like
does
I'm just
need
gonna go
to.
apply it.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with polarities and obsessed with rising signs, not just for the sign at the rising sign, but for what it means to the rest of the chart. So
Yes,
thanks
exactly.
for playing with me. Yeah. All right. Where does it feel like we're going
Oh,
next?
well,
Hmm.
we were naturally going somewhere, I think. I was talking
Okay.
about the second house squaring the fifth, 11th axis, and how, like, in the example with ascendant assemblies, this beautiful idea that I don't understand how it had never been done before because it seems so obvious to me. Like,
Right.
we should have the support of our rising sign peers for seeing the textures and the geometry of our life. Why the fuck not? Both as it's
Mhm.
unfolding on the transit plane and also as it's baked in to our chart, with that whole sign layout, right? So powerful. Um, so there were lots of people interested in making it with me. And but ultimately it was like I just think there's a lot of succeedant crunch. You can hear the succeedant houses opposing and squaring each other in this situation. Like my I wanted to find equitable ways to compensate people for their time hosting it, but like that's a lot. You need like 24 people like on staff to do that, right? Because
Yep.
if you don't want one person to have to constantly hold that group all on their own and not have a backup, then you need like two people of each rising sign, right? And it's just
Yeah.
like how how does the shared interest of astrology and this particular strand of astrology, so like communing with people kind of according to a Hellenistic technique, because we're using
Hmm.
whole sign houses, like it's just getting smaller and smaller, this intersection that is um articulating what our 11th house shared vision is. And obviously, like, we want this to be accessible. It kind of almost feels like something that should be free.
Hmm.
It felt weird to charge a good amount for it because there wasn't like massive amounts of facilitation happening. There wasn't like anything being presented. It was just like, let's meet. And it's so
Yes.
simple. But yeah, we just, the puzzle piece never really came together. And so it like fizzled, which is fine. I did listen to your episode with Jonathan on the fifth
Hmm.
house. And I love that you guys talked about it doesn't have to be permanent, as a manifester, that's like always healing balm to remember like nothing I create has to last forever, has to last in the shape of its original, in its original shape forever. So it's fine, but I often am like, man, it would be good to check back in with my Sag risings. And as an educator, I'm often thinking about what a valuable educational tool that would be for people beginning intermediate astrologers and for advanced astrologers, like all the anecdotal evidence that we get from getting to observe people of the same rising sign, just like really valuable
Hmm.
thing, but like the resources never quite worked for it. So I bring that up a little bit as like a case study of my own chart, having like
Yeah.
Libra on the 11th and wanting to find an equitable way, a balanced way, and struggling with that, but with my Saturn in the second squaring it, but also just as a way of kind of orienting to resource as a concept in the succeedant houses, and how they square each other and
And
oppose
I
each
think
other.
it's a very real conundrum, I'm not sure what else to call it, like we impasse,
Hmm.
where shame can come up when it feels like, why couldn't I keep that going? Or why can't I get this started? I have this great idea. And sometimes there's a lot of factors in that square that can make it feel like, the big word failure, and
Hmm.
a lot of shame can come up around that. But like your project continues to live on not only through the people who were in it, but anyone who read a post or an email like me, and then in what was learned, how we're disseminating through our lives, it's and through the teachings that you continue to do that were inspired by that container, which I imagine Heretic Haven is very much inspired by what you learned there.
Hmm. Sure. Yeah. It's all connected.
It's like theme. I really appreciate the way that you are attuning so much to the whole of the chart and really bringing that into this conversation. In a way, it feels like it's part of the theme because of the interconnectedness of the 11th house.
Yeah, I love that. I never thought about it that directly, but yeah, when you said that, I was like, yeah, I'm a bitch for context, you know.
Mhm.
I'm ruled by Jupiter. So I want to see the big picture. I want to understand all the context of something, you know. I want to get meaning out of the context, not just the thing that's happening, but the context surrounding it. And
Mhm.
so that's how I've learned the houses, and that's how I've learned the signs and the planets, is through these like interconnected contexts that they share. And so right now some of that interconnected context is pointing me towards remembering that 11th is the place where Jupiter
Rejoices.
rejoices, right? And
Yeah.
so I wonder about that. I might be like miss cross curricularing different concepts within Hellenistic astrology, but as a Jupiterian, even if I might not have a significant placement in the 11th, like I wonder if I have a connection to the 11th just by way of it being where my ruling planet rejoices. I had never quite thought of that before.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking about how, and I learned this just through loving Demetra George's studies, that the 11th house in Hellenistic astrology, known as the house of good spirit,
Mm.
is really about like the spirit aspect of like feeling like having these sort of unseen powers that are guiding the way for us to basically get what we're dreaming of and make our dreams come true.
Mm-hmm.
Bringing fortune and blessings to the visions we have for our lives,
Yeah.
and that the community aspect came in more later, since community is a part of what, through patrons, through connections,
Right.
through favors, these types of things that people do for each other, we uplift each other, and or
Mm-hmm.
we don't. Like we
Yeah.
can't, the other direction can happen
Yeah.
too.
Cancellation, etc., etc.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, yeah, I've spent so much time at some point, like in the early middle part of my astrology practice, middle being between when I started and now, um, really trying to root into the meaning of the houses because the keywords didn't always make sense. And a
Hmm.
big part of that was the traditional names. Like I started there. My foundation is Hellenistic, but then in second line fashion, at some point I kind of threw that out and stuck with like the resonance that I found when I really investigated each house. What's the piece of connectivity that I found? So yeah, I haven't thought that much about the House of Good Spirit and kind of the removal of the communal context. And I haven't thought about this house like that in a while. But the thing that was coming to mind is like, look at its proximity to the 10th and look at how it's above the horizon. Like, we can't extract the shared communal experience from the um, arrival to our hopes and dreams. It's not possible, right?
Hmm.
Like, there's a necessity for allyship, there's a necessity for outer world validation's not the right word, but like agreeance, congruence, support, celebration, lifting up of the individual's dream in order for it to be achieved. And now I'm thinking too about like what's the motion of the sun there, right?
Yep.
Like the 11th house is the place between the first and the 10th. So, or sorry, the 12th, the first and the 12th and the 10th. So the sun rises in the 12th and then something happens to it in the 11th before it culminates in the 10th, this place of like achievement and visibility. So yeah, I don't know, I don't have a point there, just pondering.
Yeah. That's something that helped me understand the 11th when I was learning, is to think about, through something vocab term alert, diurnal motion.
Mm-hmm.
Through what we call the diurnal motion of the planets, where the sun is rising at that eastern ascendant point, and then it's going clockwise, for students of astrology. So in the course of its pathway, it goes to the 11th house before the
Mm-hmm.
10th,
Yes.
And so it is the thing that's like ascending towards, it's the energy of ascending.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to the ancients, the idea is like that we were born with good spirits and bad spirits, like the daemons, daemon or demon, that eventually became like angel and devil, in the Christian framework of things.
Mm-hmm.
But that this idea that there are these elements at play that are uplifting you. And in general, it's my understanding that placements there kind of always are seen as benefic and so at some level because of its connection to
Yeah.
ascending with the good spirit.
Right. Which is why the benefics rejoice in the 11th and
And the
the
fifth.
5th. Yeah. Well, here's a new word that I'm going to add to my 11th house on my house's cheat sheet keyword page, which I'm just going to go ahead and be a defined ego Aries Sag. I think my house's cheat sheet keyword page is like one of the best ones out there. And,
Amazing.
and I haven't added anything to it or edited it in a long time, in years. So
Is
we're
this
having
for
a
purchase at your website?
it fucking should be. Maybe it will be soon. It's included with several of my workshops where I reference the houses, which is like every workshop of mine. So
Mm-hmm.
if you tap into any of my workshops, you'll get my house's cheat sheet. But I should just sell it. But how do you even just sell a piece of anyways?
It's the free
Here's
gift to get you on the newsletter.
my second house Saturn Neptune conjunction. I just can't figure it out. Um um I'm going to add the word support to the 11th house
Hmm.
from this generative conversation we're having because the good spirit, I mean, just thinking about like the spirit realm supporting your
Mm.
ambition, and I'm thinking about it, the 11th right now, both in relationship to the 5th and the 10th. Um,
Yeah.
like there's something to, even though the 5 and 10 are in conjunct, there is maybe a less obvious connection between this like fifth house gestation of creativity and expression and the 10th house like more kind of linear conscious intention of our work, and the
Mm.
11th house is kind of a container for both in different ways. The way it's a container to the fifth is it's like a mirror to, but like a social diurnal, right? Top of the chart versus bottom of the chart, Jupiter sect, day sect versus Venus, night sect. Like there's something more objective and product based to the 11th, where the fifth house experience of creation and vision and goal is more subjective. It's lunar, it's nocturnal, it's more process based, it's more, yeah, subjective. Um, and so, yeah, there's just something to, we can't like the same way you can't be a self without a seventh house mirror to reflect yourself back to you. You can't take the context of what you're wanting to create, what's feeling alive and wants to be born and birthed through you creatively. You can't experience that without the relational social context mirror, which is the 11th. And so we need that support. And anyways, yeah, I'm getting lost in my chart geometry right now, but and then also it's the resource to the 10th, like we talked about. It's succeedant to the 10th. It's a resource for our ambition. But yeah, just this concept of like support is ringing really true to me, that maybe the ancients seeing it as like good spirit, like support from the spirit realm. It's maybe that's not so different from support from community, organizational support, allied support, where I think about the resources of the community being greater than the resources of the individual. And so,
Mhm.
luck in that way, like if you win a grant, right? Or if
Mhm.
for whatever reason your community celebrates you and you get featured on this in this seminar, on
Yes,
this podcast, and now you have more resource, right? And we can kind of connect fortune and luck to that, but it's also just objectively being supported by people with whom you have a
it
shared
is.
a
Somebody
shared
says, "Hey,
interest.
listen to this. Hey, check this out."
Hmm.
And then that person does that too. And that's all happening without spending money on like advertising. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like
Yeah.
without any promotional energy being spent, you're
Hmm.
being promoted behind the scenes. Maybe you're not even aware. And that's really powerful. But if you think you should be able to do it alone, which is often from a shame-based place, like I should be able to figure this out by myself. I should be able, that kind of like it's got to be hard in order for it to be worthy, which is to me from a shame place. Then we're actually cutting ourselves off from the support that could make all that easeful
Mm-hmm.
and fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. You coming on this podcast is support, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm supporting you.
Yeah, totally. I've been so withdrawn from the public stage for a while. Another one of those things that like I could blame on pregnancy and becoming a new mom, but like I've been moving in this direction for years before that. My progressed moon is in a balsamic phase right now. Saturn's like near my IC, like things are just private. Um,
Mhm.
and another way that like the fifth, the 11th, the second, the eighth all intersect, like I'm just so much more focused on the fifth house, the part of my fifth house experience that is like peace right now, like just enjoying my time and finding ease and leisure. And obviously the literal fifth house component of like motherhood. I'm so much more focused on that than what I'm used to and what the precedent has been for my life, which is like putting myself out there with these hot Aries takes and like expressing myself in this fiery way and just having an Aries stellium, like being in that constant mode of expression, or in the fifth, I mean, being like in full expression mode all the time. I have a disseminating moon natally, so I'm much more used to a lot of light, a lot of expression. This balsamic phase is uncomfortable to me. It's not my nature, but I've been really embracing it. I've kind of had no choice but to, and it's just been interesting to see how in trusting the natural flow of my experience across this 511 axis, right? So my creative expression and then my sense of belonging in the fields of which I'm a part of. Um, I'm attuning to that axis of my life more authentically right now than maybe I have in the past. And there's a lot of uh you would think that like I can't afford to do that for second house reasons. And in some ways that's kind of true, but in other ways it's like I get to just be shown how uh there's ways of experiencing resourcedness regardless of how I'm showing up across that 511 axis. And I often think the squares, people talk about the squares, they force us to evolve. I often think of them as like they require us to become more agile, because we get into these stuck points and we have to figure out how to wiggle our way through them because it's not going to be so obvious when you're dealing with a square. You have to stop and correct something, stop and negotiate something. And so, yeah, just something about what you said was making me think about my experience of 2511 in a new way. Like, there's shame because there's FOMO shame. Like, all these other people's careers are advancing right now. All these other people are doing these cool collaborations. And if I'm honest with myself, I'm really happy hiding right now. Like, one of my friends asked me, we hadn't talked in a while, and they asked me how I'm doing, or something like, well, how's your world right now? And I said, my world is really tiny, but I'm loving it, And so I'm embracing that that's the season of life I'm in. But I'm not, there's still FOMO around FOMO, which we should talk about FOMO as an 11th house thing, maybe.
It did
But,
totally.
but also shame, like, what does it look to people like my career is failing because I'm just not really focused. I also have a 10th house south node, and I'm about to have my second nodal return. So I'm just like really in this season of not being very attached to that public stuff. But all of that, sorry, I'm circling back to what you said. It's kind of cool to see the different ways, whether it comes from communal support or whether it comes from just some weird, silly thing I could have never predicted, that I somehow find a way in the end to be at least minimally resourced
Mhm.
while still following the natural like ebb and flow of my life and season of my life. So this is an example, like um I didn't really have to do anything for there to still be alive a sense of communal kinship and shared vision and expression with you, um, who found me as I was in this season of like hiding. Like I didn't know you when I was at my most expressive. I've only known you since I've been kind of like gradually decrescendoing to full hermit zone. But you didn't forget about me, right? Like there's
Mhm.
still like
No.
my voice is still out there. What brings us together in our shared experience of the 11th house is still present. And I think what brings us together is more than astrology. You know, the way that you and I use astrology is similar. The way that we've like attuned to cosmos as a way of unshaming our experience of self, and the way that we bring that to the world through our lens on differentiation and all these different, and we also now have, you know, the human design connection, since you speak that language as well. All of this to say, you know, you and I don't really have a seventh house relationship, and that doesn't mean that we don't have like a very powerful potential for, you know, synergy and generativeness between us. And it's, yeah, it's just cool to get to my fear, my scarcity, my shame is around like not having enough second house stuff. And then like FOMO, or not feeling like my impact is acknowledged, which is maybe a bit of my south node in the 10th. But also I think I'm
Mhm.
a little bit of a manifester, just like wound, like seeing ripples of my work out in the world, and often feeling like a lot of the people using that language don't even know that it came from me, or like feel threatened by me, and yet are still whatever. Like, and this is like my wounded self talking for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but it's very comforting to know that I didn't have to like put a ton of energy into our relationship necessarily. I could be who I was, and you saw pieces of that that intersected with where you were going and what resonated with you. And now we've had several really generative conversations, and people will find me through it, right? Like it just goes to show the nature of like the flow of life, and how it's really beyond what our ego minds are able to like grasp and control. And I
Mm.
don't know how that's connected to the 11th house, but it is.
Oh, it is. I love it.
Support.
Because like I feel that I'm because I feel really connected in a specific way to like maybe an unlanguageable frequency that is my hope and dream, that is like there's a frequency that I feel I've identified that lives in this world through other beings. And so when I see it, it's like extremely exciting for me because I'm recognizing a frequency, not necessarily like, oh, we need to know everything about each other. Tell me all about your upbringing, like what's it like day to day? Like we don't have
Mhm.
to get close in all those ways. That's why I loved your talk about 11th versus 7th.
Mhm.
But this frequency is important and you don't really forget it to me. Like that's why I think 11th house support works at some level in the unseen realms.
Mhm.
It's like an energy that connects those of us that have a similar thing that
Mhm.
zings, and like we now and then get a ding that
Yeah.
reminds us of that person. And then we're like,
Yeah.
oh, I want to remember that person.
Yeah.
I want to talk to that person again. And it's not a tribal connection, to use human design, where it's like about I go to your things and you go to my things and we do everything together.
Exchange. It's not about exchange.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have very little tribal in my body graph. It's just not a compelling reason for contracting or friendship.
Mm-hmm.
um I'm really interested in just following the dings of like the
Mm.
spirit in somebody
Yeah.
else. Like maybe that's part of it being house of good spirit
Yeah.
at some level.
Yeah. I'm really moved by this concept. I'm so glad you're bringing it in. Like, I'm getting tinglies. The feeling, the ability of the body to discern that there is an allyship beyond the like concrete and articulatable kinds. And I could like I think I've tried to describe that feeling before, and I call it like I've literally referred to it as like the thing. Like that person has the thing, you know? And it's like I just have this shared, yeah, I have this awareness that there's certain people out in the field, in my obvious 11th house fields, people who talk about human design, people who talk about astrology, people who talk about spirituality on the internet. That's the field that I belong to, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's like, that's a big field. And there's obvious points of connection. And then there's more subtle, energetic ones. And it's kind of like this feeling of like, being across the room from someone at a party and you're watching something and it's not sometimes it can be the kind where you kind of look at each other with a judgmental eye, but it can be beyond that. It can be like I feel something happening here that I know not everybody feels, but I know that person feels it. And
Mm-hmm.
so you articulating that frequency, like all of a sudden the certain entities are coming to mind for me of other people on the internet who talk about astrology and human design and spirituality, where I'm like, there's something distinct and subtle at the same time that I feel about a handful of these faces and names that I don't feel about everyone. And I can access that feeling of kinship, of spiritual kinship, of support and of allyship in a more subtle way without needing to connect with these people on the regular, without needing to take their classes.
Yes.
It's just like that they have the thing that I have. So that's really cool to think about, like the subtle energetic layers of this like 11th house communion and support.
Yeah, I think when maybe to bring shame back, it's almost like sometimes shame can become so dense and heavy in the human realm that it's less accessible to be connected to that kind of spirit brightness, that we each have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we are talking to each other on like another level
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking at that spirit level. Um, and it really has nothing to do with like where someone grew up, what language they speak as their first language. Like none of those things are actually part of this kind of frequency connection. I feel
Mm-hmm.
that is actually like a real true connection. And I think when we connect at this level, we provide it's like a very abundant frequency. It creates more connections, more people gathering around that energy. And
Yeah.
that can bring in some second house bounty, like literally.
Yeah. I feel like this thread of the conversation is the one that my guides were like, Kelsey, you need to go listen to that. You need to listen to hear Britton say that. Yeah, that's like very on point with where I think I'm moving. So thank you for that. I had another thought and then I was just like taken by that personal call in. So I
Mm-hmm.
lost it. Yeah.
Well, it's coming. I'll tell you, I have a lot of fortune in the 11th.
Mm,
And when I found astrology, I was like, why would I have fortune there? Because I've always just perceived myself as someone who struggles in group settings and has like a, old stories that I don't attach to anymore. But maybe I do locally, but not on the internet. Old stories that I'm unseen. But I think that as the flavor of my spirit connection to my dream and how I want to show up for it in the world has gotten more clear and clarified. The lot of fortune has been showing itself to me in terms of bringing me like what I need, in terms of that flow of support.
mm-hmm. Mm, yeah. I was just like, I just glanced at your chart to visually take in because I'm very visual. And for whatever it's worth, I have a lot that aspects your 2-degree Aquarius
Oh,
chart of
a lot of
fortune.
fortune.
Yeah, early Sag ascendant, early Aries stellium. So, yeah, that's what was going through my mind was somehow there's like a thread of connectivity between
Yeah, and I
what.
think it's square to my Chiron in Taurus.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and well, that's another thread I was thinking about too, like on the, because you had brought up earlier the kind of the political context, or you alluded to the political context of here and now, re this 11th house concept of like where our hopes and dreams are actualized and where our visions for the future, are kind of are actualized, and the importance of the little bit of heresy I was bringing early on of, hey, it's not that deep. Like we just have one thing in common, one shared interest. We don't have to have it all in common, and like the need for us to have nuance in our shared endeavors so that disagreement on one plane doesn't completely derail us from progress in another. Uh, and I'm just thinking about like the collective transit, the collective context of Chiron and Aries in all of this, and like we were talking about FOMO in relation to the 11th house, and how with Chiron and Aries, it's this collective codependency clearing that's happening. And the phrase that I repeatedly have been saying for the years that Chiron has been in Aries for us to like calibrate to the spiritual curriculum of this transit is, where have you been abandoning yourself for fear of being abandoned by the other? And so,
Mhm.
yeah, the just looking at it through the context of the 11th is just another way of exploring that question, because we're acknowledging that we do need the support, we do need the organization around our shared interests in order for our shared and our individual hopes and dreams to be achieved. And where are we not even giving those dreams a chance because we're abandoning them so quickly because we're overemphasizing the need for that support and the need for that belonging against the equally need necessary need for like our unique differentiated authenticity.
That's really, really profound. Yeah, I mean, for many, our hopes and dreams for this world may not, may be minimized, shamed, made fun of for being impossible, for being naive, for how dare you think, like, you really think the world could work like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, like at midlife, like just going ahead and living the frequency of what I see it to be, rather
Mm-hmm.
than waiting for the world to produce an environment where I can feel safe to,
Yeah.
has just completely transformed my life. And then all the kinds of people who constellate around me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an inside job, and that's a contradiction that I think I hope hopes and dreams more people will embrace,
Yeah.
because
I
it's
saw
also
that post you did on election day. I was
oh
like, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess in a way my version of what you just said is like I'm not invested in national politics as a way for change to happen anymore. And so to be honest, I was kind of disappointed at how many people were disappointed, because I was like, "Oh, there's still this level of investment on that." You know? Um which that's fine, whatever, you
I
know?
know. And half those people might not actually be disappointed, but they may think that if they don't say that, they look like bad people.
Yeah.
And that's
Yes.
shame.
That's shame. Yeah. Yeah. And so this concept that you're bringing in of like living in the world that you know is possible now,
Yep.
that's what I've been doing for years. And if you measure my success according to like the standards of capitalism in this paradigm that's dying, I look like a total fuck up, you know? And have barely any shame around that anymore, but it's still there, you know? Um, but yeah, I'm just thinking again, I'm keep coming back to this like ethereal allyship that you kind of oriented us to in the last few
Mm,
minutes of like in
ethereal allyship.
in order for the like I'm attuning to myself, like I'm returning to my home frequency, I'm living my design, I'm unshaming every facet of me day by day. And that's how I get on the trajectory to living in the world that I want to live in, because it is an inside job. And the more that we do that, the clearer frequency we're putting out through our fifth house, right? Through our seventh house, through all the relationship houses, through our 10th house, what's seen out there, the more possible it is to attract, not just to attract, but to like notice that you're attracting the quote right people. And that's how we build. It's mycelium, that's how we build a new network.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to overthrow the old one. I even like in recent years stopped feeling comfortable with the word anti-capitalist as an identity, which is
Yeah.
one that I held tightly at one point in time, because I was like, I'm not I'm not the inverse of capitalism. I'm something so much more creative and expansive than that. It's very binary to identify with like these frameworks or the opposite of them or the destruction of them. Like, so the more that I can attune to self, the more opportunity there is to notice that Britain's over there on the internet. And while I may not know Britain like deeply interpersonally, I can feel that Britain is already living in this other world. So it's not like the world's gonna fall. It's like this other one is getting built. This
Yeah.
other mycelial network already exists and is already getting built. And I remember when I was posting my like off the cuff, weird little strange takes on the election, I had posted at one point something like, if you're seeing this story, something about like another world is possible. And if you're seeing this story, you already live in it, even if fleetingly. Because anybody who observes me, anybody who observes you, anybody who observes someone who is creating their world in whatever small way in accordance with their truth instead of the oppressive cultures is living to some extent in this other world. It already exists. We're already creating it,
Mm.
right? And so even if people aren't consciously there with us, observe like them seeing us doing that, even if it's not registering to them that like what we're doing by not caring about conventional success or by unshaming parts of ourselves or all of ourselves, even if they don't quite understand the gravity of this work, and I say work both on like the personal plane and the collective plane, like that by them seeing it, they have a pinky finger in this world.
Mhm. Yes. This
And
is
that
it,
and
you know?
is that the 11th house? Did we just redefine
I think we just did.
it?
Yes, this is the thing. I
The
mean,
thing.
8 years ago, within a year, had to stop my completely exhausting dedication to social justice activism. And because of this call to a third way, like that you're speaking of, which is like, oh, that's another thing. It's not the antithesis, which isn't to shame all of social justice. But I
Hmm.
was feeling a lot of shame and depletion there and not feeling like I could hook into a new reality.
Mm-hmm. It was a reactive one.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I found so many incredible human beings in that world and had such beautiful conversations, but I did not feel empowered.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think what you're saying right now feels we've both, we've been living this, and also this is like to me the curriculum of now.
Yes. Yes. This is like I have a seed in my head that my rational conditioned mind is like trying to figure out if I can turn it into a course, you know?
Yes.
I don't
We
know if
heretics.
yeah, right. We heretic slash second house Saturn, who like my recent initiation money is running out and I've got to figure out money next, you know? So I'm like, how can trying to contort it into an offering, which may or may not happen. But in my head, it's called ALT. And it's just like teaching people how to access this alternative world that already exists by following your true self, right? Um,
Yes. singing, our spirits are singing together because I'm in the same place. And that's what I feel like this project currently
Yeah.
is. Because I do think unshaming is like a service to the collective, not just a personal working on yourself. It's the opposite of working on yourself because
100%.
working on yourself is not in the spirit of what we're talking about here, which is
Hmm.
compassion and exuberance. So,
Hmm.
do you, I'm feeling like, whoa, we kind of reached like a completion point. Is there anything else you have coming through you that you want to
Um,
speak?
no, I have so many cool new takeaways.
Me too.
So much to assimilate. And honestly, Britton, it's been a while since I've had that feeling. So thank you for that.
Oh,
It's been a while since like like I've been bored.
yeah.
So
The worst for Aries.
Aries Sag too. Like I need and
Yes.
Gemini. My Aries and Sag placements are all ruled by a Mars and Jupiter in Gemini. So
Mm.
yeah,
I forgot
thank
we're both
you.
Jupiter and Gemini. Hmm. Yeah, you're
Breathing
welcome.
some new life into my languages and my spiritual context. Thank you.
You always do for me. Thank you. Well, you want to share like how people can connect with you? I know that's always evolving and changing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like always trying to be not less online. I go through like periods where I really enjoy social media as a playing field, and periods where I really don't. But I'm trying to be less dependent on online, and I've succeeded in that a lot in the last few years. That being said, my Instagram, which is the only social media I'm really somewhat active on, is Kelsey Rose Tort. Rose like the flower, Tort. My website is the same, kelseyrosestort.com. And yeah, the most like consistent way of engaging with me these days is I was teaching a lot for like 4 years, teaching a lot of like astrology, relational concepts, human design, spiritual concepts, mostly through the languages of astrology and human design, through like long courses and workshops, one-off workshops. So I just have a huge library of teachings. That's like the best way to to hear from me at this point in time. I also do have a podcast that I release episodes on like extremely sporadically called the Maya Games. I might be doing more of that in 2025. I'm kind of like just getting the feels for what 2025 is looking like on the public work stage for me, but I'm not investing much in it because, like I said, pending South Node in the 10th nodal return.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but those two things, I think, those three things that I mentioned, I think will remain consistent throughout my website, my library of astrology and human design educational resources, which are like both I'm good at teaching the basics. So a lot of them are
You are.
like the basics ground up, but also like the workshop example that made you think of me for this. A lot of them are like applying a concept within the system to accessing some deeper layer of liberation and truth within us. And always taking in the like socio-political context of what's going on in our world and how we can see that in the cosmological unfolding. So yeah, a little something for everyone in my library of classes and workshops, and then the podcast. I'll probably be showing up there with some consistency. Um,
Do you still do readings?
I do, but at this point, I'm only doing readings. I'm only working one-on-one with people who have or are studying with me.
Okay.
And I could talk about the why of that, but I won't. So if people have already studied with me, they can book with me. And if they haven't, if you sign up for something, through my workshop library, then you get access to book with me as well. I don't know how long that will be, the stipulation, but that's the parameter for now. I feel a lot more ease and peace working one on one with people who I know like already have engaged with these languages the way that I engage with them.
Hmm.
It feels like
I
much,
know that feeling.
yeah, it can easily be a drain of energy otherwise, and it can be not impactful to them because it's like,
Yeah.
it's like maybe we're not meeting up on that more ethereal 11th house plane. And
No.
then it's just kind of a waste of time for us both.
Yeah. Yeah. There are plenty of other people out there too.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you, Kelsey.
Yeah.
This was
Thanks for having me.
so rich.
What a cool project, and just really honored to be a part of it, and like tickled to get to be this part of it in particular.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you for being who you are in the world and sharing a frequency that I deeply resonate with. I really felt mutated by our conversation. Listeners, of course, I'm inviting you to please connect to Kelsey if you resonated with their voice. Many links are in the show notes. Excited for future projects and what might unfold from this conversation. If you are enjoying the Unshaming project, inviting you to stay connected with me as I begin to promote Unshaming Your Chart, my new offering, first time out, the inaugural Unshaming Your Chart course that will initiate on December 18th, which happens to be the exact day of Saturn on my sun for the third time. Kind of wild because I discovered that after I'd already picked the date. But of course, I mean, wow. So I'm going to be sharing a whole lot more about that starting the week after Thanksgiving holiday, because Thanksgiving holiday is when I'm going to like really begin to sit down and get all the deets, as they say. And I will be able to begin to give you more information about what to expect, how much it will cost, what kind of time, energy, investment that this is going to be for you. What I can say for you now is that we'll initiate December 18th, but then we will not meet again for 3 to 4 weeks because I want to have like a really zingy, mutating, catalyzing, disruptive start and give you some space to integrate and to sleep on and rest with what came through for you. And then we'll get into it. I'm just not sure exactly today how many weeks it will be, but I will be able to give you that information very soon. So, all right. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening and being part of Unshaming the Houses with me. If you love Moon to Moon, if you like the kinds of projects that come out of here, if you resonate with my voice and find it supportive in your life, if you're glad that you take the time to listen and you haven't yet done a rating or a review, I'm inviting you to do that right now before you forget. Thank you so much. It's so helpful to me. I get so excited when I see one come in. Thank you. All right. Wishing y'all the very best. Cheers.